He lived a quiet life that most people never noticed. He woke up early, went to work, came back home, tired, ate dinner alone, and slept in silence. His room was small, his routine was simple, and his heart felt heavy most nights. He wasn't unhappy in a loud way. It was more like a quiet, tired feeling that stayed in his chest all the time. He told himself that this was normal. This was just how life was supposed to feel after too many small disappointments. He had loved once before, a long time ago, and when it ended, it felt like something inside him went quiet. Not broken, but silent. He stopped expecting things from people. He stopped dreaming about a future where someone would sit next to him and laugh at his jokes or ask how his day really went. He learned how to be strong, alone, and with time. Being alone became a habit that felt safer than hoping for something more. She lived a life that looked brighter from the outside. But she understood loneliness just as much. She worked hard, helped her family, and always made time for people who needed her. Friends saw her as someone who was always okay, someone who could carry everyone's problems and still smile. But when she was alone, she felt tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. She wanted someone who would care about her without her having to be strong all the time. Their worlds didn't crash together in a dramatic way. There were no fireworks or loud music. They met in a normal place, on a normal day, in a moment that could have been forgotten. The weather was warm, the street was busy, and people were moving in every direction. He had stopped to fix something small that had gone wrong in his day. She was nearby, waiting, watching, not in a curious way, but in a quiet, thoughtful way. He looked up and noticed her standing there. Their eyes met for less than a second, but something soft happened in that short moment. Not love, not excitement. Just a small feeling of comfort. He felt like he wasn't being judged or ignored. He felt seen in a calm way. She didn't think much of it at first. To her, he looked like someone who carried a lot of thoughts inside his head. Quiet eyes, still posture, a face that looked older than his real age. Not because of wrinkles, but because of stories no one had asked him about. She felt a strange pull toward him, like life was gently telling her, pay attention. Something small forced them to speak. A simple question, a short answer, a polite smile. Their voices were soft and careful, like to people who didn't want to scare the moment away. They didn't share deep secrets. They didn't talk about their pain. They talked about little things. The weather, the long day, how busy the place was. But even those small words felt different. They didn't feel empty. When they went their separate ways, he noticed something strange. The world felt a little less heavy. The noise around him felt softer. He walked slower than usual, as if he didn't want to step too hard on the feeling that had quietly entered his day. He told himself it was nothing. Just a normal conversation. Just a stranger. But he thought about her that night. She experienced the same thing, though she wouldn't have admitted it. She went home and finished her usual chores. She helped where she was needed. She smiled where people expected her to smile. But her mind kept returning to that small moment, that quiet voice. That short smile, the way he looked at her without trying to impress her or take something from her. Days passed. Life moved forward the same way it always had. Work, plans, responsibilities, but fate has a strange way of repeating moments when two people are meant to notice each other. They saw each other again, not planned, not expected. This time, the moment lasted a little longer. A greeting turned into a short conversation. A short conversation turned into a shared laugh. The laugh wasn't loud, but it was real. He felt his chest tighten in a way that scared him. Not because it hurt, but because it felt alive. A feeling he had buried long ago started to move inside him. He didn't understand it. He didn't trust it. But he couldn't ignore it. She began to feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. She didn't feel like she had to perform or pretend. She didn't feel like she had to be strong for him. She could be quiet. She could be soft. She could be real. They exchanged small pieces of their lives. Nothing too deep. Nothing too painful. Just enough to feel like two real people talking. Instead of two strangers passing time, he learned that she cared about simple things. Warm tea, calm walks, honest conversations. She learned that he preferred silence over loud places, that he listened more than he spoke, that when he did speak, his words were slow and careful. One evening, as the sun went down and the air felt lighter, they stood side by side without speaking. No pressure, no awkwardness, just two people sharing the same quiet space. And in that silence, something important happened. They both realized they didn't feel alone. He didn't say it. She didn't say it. But they felt it. A small bridge had been built between two hearts that were used to walking alone. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't fast. It was gentle, like a slow heartbeat growing stronger with time. When they walked away that day, both of them carried the same quiet thought in their hearts. Maybe. This wasn't just a passing moment. Maybe. This was the beginning of something real. He started noticing her in ways he hadn't expected. At first, it was small things. The way her eyes caught the light when she smiled, the way her hands moved when she spoke, the way she listened so carefully, as if every word mattered. It was strange for him because he hadn't paid attention to people like this for a long time. He had learned to keep his distance, to not feel too much, to protect himself. But with her it felt natural to look, to notice, to care. She noticed him too, in ways she didn't understand at first. She noticed the small details in his expressions. The way he laughed quietly at things most people wouldn't even think were funny. She noticed his patience, the way he waited when she took her time, never rushing or making her feel hurried. She noticed his quiet strength, the kind of strength that didn't need to show off or make noise. She had always thought she knew what kind of people could be important in her life. But he surprised her. They started spending more time together, though neither of them planned it. Sometimes it was simple. A walk after work, sharing a coffee in a small cafe, talking while waiting for errands. Nothing big, nothing dramatic, but every moment felt different. Every moment felt alive. He found himself sharing thoughts he had never said aloud, feelings he had tucked away long ago. And she found herself letting her guard down in ways she hadn't allowed anyone to do for years. Life outside their small moments continued, full of challenges. Work was tiring. Family needed attention. Life demanded effort. There were days when he felt too tired to even meet her, and days when she felt weighed down by her own responsibilities. But they always found a way back to each other. Not because it was easy, but because it mattered. The connection they felt couldn't be ignored, no matter how heavy life became. Sometimes they disagreed. Sometimes misunderstandings slipped in, and the silence that followed felt uncomfortable. He had learned to retreat when things felt difficult, and she had learned to protect herself from disappointment. But something inside both of them refused to let these moments break what was forming between them. They started to understand that love wasn't just about happiness and agreement. Love could be quiet, patient, and sometimes tested. They shared parts of their pasts that were difficult to speak about. He told her about moments when he felt lost, times when life had been too heavy, and the ways he had learned to survive alone. She listened, not with judgment, but with care. She didn't try to fix him. She just understood, and that was more than he had expected from anyone in a long time. She shared her own stories, stories of struggle and resilience, stories of being strong when she felt weak, stories of carrying responsibilities and the small moments of sadness that came with it. He didn't need her to be happy all the time. He just needed to know the real her, and she realized she didn't have to hide parts of herself anymore. As weeks turned into months, they began to depend on each other in subtle ways. He noticed when she seemed tired and offered to help without being asked. She noticed when he seemed distant and offered her presence without pushing. Their gestures were small but meaningful. They didn't need grand declarations of love. Every small act built trust, and every shared smile built comfort. They laughed together often. Not just polite laughs, but deep, easy laughs that came from feeling safe. They laughed at silly things, at mistakes, at small accidents. They laughed at the world around them, and in doing so, they found relief from the burdens they carried alone for so long. The laughter became a bridge between them, a signal that they could be themselves without fear. He started thinking about her when they weren't together. Not in an anxious way, but in a gentle, persistent way. He wondered what she was doing, if she was smiling, if she was feeling the same quiet comfort he felt in her presence. He didn't push, didn't demand, didn't make things complicated. He just allowed himself to care. And she did the same, letting her thoughts return to him without guilt or hesitation. One evening, after a long day, they sat together on a park bench. The sun was setting, and the sky was painted with soft colors. They didn't speak at first, just watched the quiet world around them. The moment felt heavy with unspoken understanding. He reached out gently and took her hand. She didn't pull away. She didn't speak. She just let her hand rest in his, and in that small touch, everything felt calm, real, and safe. They talked about the future, but only in small ways. Not big promises, not plans for years ahead, just small hopes. A hope that they could continue seeing each other, that they could continue building trust, that they could continue being honest. They didn't need to define everything. Just being present in each other's lives was enough for now. They faced challenges together, even when life tested them. There were days when work was hard, when family issues pressed in, when past memories brought old pains to the surface. But they learned to face these days together, offering support and understanding instead of judgment. They realized that love wasn't just about good times. It was about holding each other through difficulties and knowing that the bond mattered more than the challenges. One night, as they walked under a quiet streetlight, he told her something he hadn't said to anyone in years. He told her that meeting her had changed the way he saw the world, that she had reminded him there was still beauty in connection, and that he felt alive again in ways he hadn't expected. She listened, her eyes soft, and told him she felt the same. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it was honest, and that honesty made it powerful. They began to understand each other's fears. He feared losing control, being hurt again, or expecting too much. She feared being alone, being misunderstood, or being too vulnerable. They didn't promise to erase these fears. They promised to face them together, to be patient, and to communicate openly. In that understanding, their connection grew deeper, stronger, and more real. As days passed, their routines intertwined. Simple habits became shared rituals. A cup of coffee in the morning, a walk at dusk, a text to check in. These small acts didn't feel ordinary anymore. They felt like building blocks of trust, care, and quiet love. They were learning that real love wasn't about grand gestures or perfection. It was about showing up consistently. Even when life was messy, he noticed that he started caring about her happiness in a way that went beyond himself. He wanted her to feel safe, to feel seen, to feel valued. Not because it benefited him, but because it mattered. She noticed the same about him. She wanted him to feel calm, understood, and appreciated. They were learning to give without expecting in return, and in doing so, they discovered the depth of connection that had been missing in their lives. There were still moments of doubt. Days when he questioned whether he was ready for this closeness. Days when she wondered if trusting him was wise. But each time doubt surfaced, they faced it together, not with anger or blame, but with honesty. They learned that being real meant allowing vulnerability and acknowledging fear. It meant choosing each other even when things were not perfect. One rainy afternoon, they found themselves sitting together in silence. The sound of rain hitting the roof was soothing. They didn't need words. Their presence was enough. They shared warmth through a small touch, a gentle hand on the back, a leaning shoulder. It wasn't romantic in a dramatic sense. It was human, comforting, and real. Through small moments like these, they learned that love could be quiet, patient, and steady. It wasn't always about passion or excitement. It was about feeling safe, understood, and cared for. It was about being seen, not as an ideal, but as a real, flawed human being. They discovered that this kind of love was rare, powerful, and profoundly moving. As night fell, they walked home slowly, savoring the calmness that had become theirs when together. They didn't need to speak about tomorrow or plan a future. Just knowing they would see each other again was enough. They had learned to appreciate the present, to feel connection without pressure, and to nurture a bond that was growing steadily, quietly and powerfully. And in these small, everyday moments, they realized something important. Love didn't have to shout to be felt. It didn't have to be dramatic to be true. It was in the small gestures, the shared silences, the gentle care. I had the patience that allowed their hearts to grow closer without fear. He had started to hope again. She had started to trust again. And both of them, carefully, cautiously, had begun to believe that what was forming between them was not a fleeting feeling, but something real, something strong, and something that could last. Their bond was growing. Quiet, but undeniable, and they both knew that whatever life brought, they would face it together. And in that, they discovered the first true taste of a love that was patient, steady, and real. Life has a way of testing people when they least expect it. Their bond, though strong, faced challenges that neither of them could control. Work became demanding. Responsibilities grew heavier. Sometimes past memories surfaced at the wrong moments, making them doubt themselves and each other. They were learning that love wasn't just about happy walks in the park or gentle conversations over coffee. Love, real love, had to survive stress, fear, and the harsh moments life threw at them. He noticed changes in himself. Moments of doubt crept in when he wondered if he was doing enough, if he was enough. His past had taught him that closeness came with risk. And even now, when he felt safe with her, that risk lingered in the back of his mind. Sometimes he pulled back slightly, not out of disinterest, but out of fear. Fear of disappointment, fear of loss, fear of opening himself too wide. She noticed too. She had begun to worry if her feelings were being mirrored, if she was investing too much of herself. She had been strong alone for so long that trusting someone with her heart was not simple. She feared being hurt, and the small moments of tension between them amplified that fear. Yet, despite the unease, she could not ignore the truth she felt when she was with him. She wanted him in her life. They had disagreements, subtle but piercing. Not arguments over major things, but small things that mattered to them. Maybe a word said too sharply. Maybe a misunderstanding about intentions. Each time, the silence that followed felt heavier than the disagreement itself. He would retreat, needing to process, while she would worry, wondering if he had grown distant. And yet, even in the discomfort, the bond between them refused to break. He realized that patience was becoming more important than ever. Loving her meant understanding her fears and insecurities and holding space for them without judgment. He could not force her to trust him, but he could consistently show her that he was there, present, and steady. Each small act of care, each moment of listening without interruption, became a way to strengthen their connection. She learned patience in her own way. She had to remind herself that closeness did not mean losing control of her life. She had to trust that he was committed, even when moments of silence or tension felt uncomfortable. She had to remind herself that love was not about perfection, but about honesty, effort, the willingness to face challenges together. They began sharing more than just surface-level thoughts. He told her about old regrets, decisions he wished he had handled differently, and the small ways life had hurt him. She listened quietly, without offering quick solutions or judgments. She simply let him speak, letting him know that his past did not define him, but that he could share it without fear. She shared her own vulnerabilities. She spoke about the loneliness she sometimes felt, the pressures she carried, and the fear of losing herself in caring for others. He did not offer advice, did not dismiss her feelings. He simply acknowledged them, and in that acknowledgement, she found comfort. Sharing these truths did not feel risky anymore because they were met with understanding instead of judgment. One evening, a heavy rainstorm trapped them under a small awning while waiting for a bus. The city around them was loud with water pouring on the streets and the hum of tires on wet asphalt. They could have been irritated, stressed, or distracted, but instead, they found a small warmth in the situation. They laughed at how drenched everyone else seemed and shared stories about their worst experiences with rain. The storm became a quiet memory, a small moment of connection in an otherwise hectic life, as they spent more time together. They noticed subtle changes in themselves. He became more willing to open up, to share even when it felt uncomfortable. He began to recognize that vulnerability was not weakness, but a bridge to real connection. She began to trust herself to be seen fully, to accept that she did not have to hide her doubts or fears to be loved. Yet life's pressures were constant. Family expectations, long workdays, and moments of personal stress sometimes intruded on the time they wanted to spend together. He found himself frustrated when he could not be fully present, and she found herself longing for reassurance during difficult days. But instead of pulling away, they communicated. They spoke about the struggles they were facing and how it affected them. They learned that honesty was a stronger bond than silence. There were nights when he worried about the future. He wondered if the distance between them would grow, if their small moments would fade, and if fear would eventually drive them apart. She noticed his quiet withdrawal sometimes and felt the sting of worry. But she also noticed his effort, his consistency, and his willingness to face the difficult conversations rather than running from them. One afternoon, they sat together on a bench by a small river. The water moved slowly, reflecting the soft light of late afternoon. They talked about the things they wanted from life, but not in grand terms. Just simple hopes, a sense of peace, a desire to feel secure. The conversation wasn't dramatic or filled with big promises. It was honest, steady, and grounding. They realized that even without a perfect plan for the future, they were creating a foundation built on trust, understanding, and patience. He began noticing her little habits and quirks more deeply. How she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. How she hummed softly while thinking. How her eyes lit up when she talked about something she loved. Every small detail became a part of the tapestry of connection they were weaving together. She noticed his changes too. How he relaxed a little more when she was around. How he smiled more often. How he paused to listen deeply, not just hearing words, but understanding feelings. She saw him becoming the version of himself that he had hidden from the world. The one capable of love, trust, and hope. One evening, as dusk settled in, he held her hand while they walked along a quiet street. The warmth of the touch was grounding, a reminder that they were not facing life alone. She leaned slightly into him, feeling the steady presence that had become a quiet comfort. Neither of them needed to speak. Words were unnecessary. Presence was enough. They began to understand that love was not always dramatic. It was not about grand gestures, lavish gifts, or constant excitement. Love was showing up when life was difficult. Love was listening when words were hard. Love was being present even when feelings were complicated. They discovered that this kind of love required courage, patience, and a willingness to accept both joy and hardship. Challenges continued to come. Days when he felt stressed and short-tempered, days when she felt overwhelmed and insecure, but they learned to navigate these moments together. Instead of blaming, they asked questions. Instead of withdrawing, they reached out. Instead of assuming, they communicated. And in that process, they discovered that the bond they shared was growing stronger, more resilient, and more deeply human. There were times when doubts still appeared. Moments when he questioned whether he could keep being patient, whether he could truly be trusted, whether he could be the person she needed. She questioned whether she could continue trusting fully, whether her heart could handle vulnerability, whether she could accept someone completely with all their flaws. But every time doubt surfaced, they chose to face it together. They celebrated small victories too, a day when work was easier, a moment when laughter returned after a tense conversation. A shared silence that felt comfortable instead of awkward. Every small victory became proof that love was possible, even when life was complicated. One night, sitting by a small fire they made in a safe outdoor space, he spoke about the times he had felt lost and alone. He admitted that he had feared never finding someone who could understand him. She listened quietly, holding his hand, letting him feel safe to be seen without hiding. She shared her own fears and hopes. And in that exchange, something profound happened. They realized that love was strongest not when life was easy, but when it was honest. Through all the challenges, disagreements, doubts, and small victories. They learned that real love required effort. Not effort to impress, but effort to understand, to be present, to accept, and to nurture. They learned that love was not a feeling that could be assumed or demanded. It was a choice, every day, to be honest, to care, and to stay, even when it was not convenient. By the end of part 3, they'd come to understand each other in a way few people ever do. They knew each other's fears, quirks, and silent struggles. They had built a connection that was tested by reality, stretched by doubt, but strengthened by patience, honesty, and quiet care. And while life continued to challenge them, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, not because love made it easy, but because love had made it real. Life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. Even theirs, built on patience, honesty, and care, was not immune. As the months went by, small cracks began to appear. It wasn't dramatic at first, just subtle shifts that neither of them ignored. A glance held a little too long, a tone and a word that didn't feel right, a silence that stretched longer than it should. They both felt it, though neither wanted to admit it. He started noticing his own frustration more often. Life outside their moments together was pressing heavily. He sometimes took that pressure out in ways he immediately regretted. He snapped at small things, words sharper than he meant, a hand gesture more abrupt than necessary. Afterward, guilt followed quickly, and he wished he could rewind time. But life doesn't offer rewinds. Only forward movement and the responsibility of fixing what has been broken. She noticed too. She noticed the tension in his shoulders, the distracted look in his eyes, the quiet withdrawal that he didn't speak about. And though she tried to understand, to give him space, she sometimes felt invisible, unimportant, or abandoned. Her heart hurt, but she didn't show it right away. She had learned to protect herself, to be strong even when it was painful. But in the quiet corners of her mind, the fear of losing him grew, making her uncertain of what to do. One evening, the breaking point came unexpectedly. A conversation that should have been simple turned into an argument. Neither of them remembered exactly what triggered it. Perhaps it was exhaustion, perhaps misunderstanding, perhaps a collection of small disappointments that had gone unspoken. Words were said, sharp and unfiltered. Words that cut deeper than either intended. He stormed out, not knowing where to go, only knowing that he needed space to think. She stayed behind, tears streaming silently, feeling both anger and sadness. Wondering if the bridge they had built over months could survive words that were harsher than life itself. That night, they both felt the emptiness of distance more acutely than anything before. The home that felt comfortable when together now felt silent and cold. For a few days they avoided each other, not out of dislike, but because the weight of the conflict made connection feel impossible. Every message left unsent, every phone call unanswered, became another layer of fear that maybe their closeness had been fragile all along. Yet even in this silence, they both thought of each other constantly. No one else could fill the quiet spaces of thought that each had occupied in the other's mind. He reflected on his actions, realizing how much he valued her presence and how reckless he had been in expressing his frustration. He recognized that love was not only about comfort and connection, but also about forgiveness, humility, and the courage to apologize. He remembered every small moment that had built their bond, every laugh, every quiet conversation, every shared silence. He understood that letting pride or frustration dictate his actions could undo months of genuine care. She reflected too. She thought about the times she had let fear take the lead. The moments when doubt made her push him away emotionally, even when she longed for closeness. She remembered every gentle touch, every laugh, every moment he had made her feel safe. She realized that love required patience and understanding, not only toward the other person, but also toward oneself. Eventually, the distance became too heavy to bear. He reached out first, a simple message, acknowledging the fight, expressing regret, and asking if she was willing to talk. She hesitated, afraid that conversation might reopen the wounds, but her heart told her that this bond was worth the risk. She responded, agreeing to meet. The first meeting was quiet, tense, filled with cautious words and hesitant glances. But it was also real. They began to speak honestly, not just about the argument, but about the deeper fears that had surfaced. He admitted his tendency to retreat under pressure, his fear of losing control, his worry that he might hurt her unintentionally. She admitted her fear of being invisible, her fear that she might misread his intentions, her worry that expressing her emotions could push him away. For the first time, they laid bare the insecurities that had quietly influenced their actions for months. Listening to each other was the hardest and most healing part. Neither tried to interrupt, neither tried to justify past mistakes too quickly. They simply heard, and in hearing, began to heal. Words that had caused pain were replaced with acknowledgement, understanding, and the promise of better care moving forward. They realized that love was strongest when they could face conflict with honesty instead of silence or anger. They began small steps of reconciliation. A gentle touch, a shared meal, a walk under the evening sky. These moments were cautious, careful, but filled with intention. Every smile was genuine, every gesture sincere. Trust had been shaken, but trust could be rebuilt with effort, patience, and consistency. They understood that this process would not be quick, but it was necessary. During the healing, they discovered new ways to support each other. He learned to pause before reacting, to recognize when stress was influencing his behavior, and to communicate calmly. She learned to express her needs more clearly, to ask for reassurance without fear of being burdensome, and to trust his presence even when uncertainty arose. Together, they were learning that love was an ongoing practice. It's not a fixed feeling. They also discovered forgiveness, not as a word to be spoken lightly, but as an act of the heart. Forgiveness meant letting go of resentment, allowing space for mistakes, and choosing to continue caring even after being hurt. Both realized that without forgiveness, the bridge they had built could never hold through storms. With it, they could withstand challenges stronger than before. One evening, after weeks of quiet effort, they sat together watching the stars appear in the night sky. The air was calm, the world around them quiet, and the tension of the past weeks seemed to soften. They held hands, not as an obligation, but as a choice, a silent promise to continue despite difficulties. They didn't need grand words. They only needed presence, honesty, and care. They spoke about life and its unpredictability, about how challenges were inevitable, about how fear and doubt were normal, and about how choosing each other, even when life was hard, was what made their bond real. It wasn't a perfect love. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy, human, and deeply real. Through this period of breaking and healing, they discovered something powerful. Love wasn't about avoiding pain or difficulty. It wasn't about everything being easy or always smooth. Real love was about being willing to face struggles together, to communicate openly, to accept mistakes, and to nurture connection even when it hurt. They realized that this was the kind of love that could last, because it was rooted in honesty and care, not fantasy. They celebrated their small victories in this process. A day without tension, a conversation that ended with laughter, a shared silence that felt comforting rather than awkward. Every small success became a reminder that their love was resilient and capable of growth. They were learning that consistency, care, and understanding mattered far more than grand gestures or dramatic declarations. He found himself reflecting on how much he had changed. The anger and frustration that had once come easily were now tempered by patience. His ability to communicate, to listen, and to express care had deepened. He understood that love required continual effort, and he was willing to make that effort. She reflected too. She realized that vulnerability was not a weakness but a path to connection. She learned that expressing fear, doubt, or need did not diminish her strength, but rather allowed the bond to grow deeper. She understood that trust was a process, not a given. I guess I felt more willing than ever to invest in it. In the quiet moments after reconciliation, they discovered joy and simplicity again. Walking through a park, sharing a quiet meal, sitting together watching the world go by, these moments became treasures. Not because they were dramatic, but because they were real and shared. They understood that life's beauty often lay in the ordinary, in the small gestures of care and attention that built intimacy over time. By the end of this chapter in their lives, they had learned the power of resilience. They understood that love could bend under pressure, that arguments in silence could hurt deeply, but that with effort, honesty, and patience, it could bend without breaking. They had discovered the strength of a bond tested by reality, and forged in mutual care. They no longer feared conflict the way they once had. Instead, they saw it as an opportunity to deepen understanding, to practice patience, and to reinforce trust. They knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but they also knew that they had faced one of the hardest moments already and had emerged stronger together. In this space of healing and renewed connection, they found a quiet confidence in their relationship. They understood that love was not about perfection, but about showing up consistently, caring deeply, and choosing each other even when life was hard. They learned that this choice, repeated day after day, was what made love truly powerful. And as they walked home that night, side by side, the weight of past tension finally eased. Their steps were slow, their hands intertwined, their hearts quietly aligned. They knew that this moment, fragile and human, was a testament to what they could endure together. It was proof that love, real love, could survive breaking and still grow stronger, shaping a connection that was deeper, wiser, and more profoundly real than before. Time had passed, and their bond had grown stronger in ways they hadn't imagined. They had faced difficult moments, arguments, misunderstandings, and fear. But each challenge had brought them closer rather than tearing them apart. It was not a perfect love, far from it, but it was real, steady, and human in the deepest sense. Every shared smile, every gesture of care, every quiet conversation had built a foundation they both understood could withstand life's storms. He noticed how different life felt when she was near. Ordinary days suddenly seemed brighter. The early mornings, the long commutes, the routine tasks, they all felt lighter when he thought of her, or when she was beside him. Her presence didn't demand perfection. It only invited honesty, warmth, and care. He found himself wanting to be better, not for anyone else, but for the life they were quietly building together. She noticed the change in him, too. The quiet strength she had first seen had become a steady calm. He smiled more freely, laughed more genuinely, and spoke with a softness that drew her in. She realized that trust could grow, not overnight but steadily through small, consistent acts of care. She no longer feared that opening her heart would be dangerous, because he had proven, day by day, that he could be trusted. Their days were filled with small routines that felt intimate without being loud or dramatic. Breakfast together when time allowed. A simple walk in the evening. Messages during the day to check in or share something small that made them think of each other. These moments were ordinary, yet each one carried meaning because it was chosen, intentional, and shared. They didn't need grand gestures to feel connection. They understood that presence and care were far more powerful than any spectacle. They also learned to celebrate the little joys in life together. A cup of tea on a rainy afternoon, watching the sun set after a long day, laughing at something silly in a quiet corner of a cafe. These small joys became treasured memories because they were shared, because they were noticed, because they were alive in the simple presence of each other. Life, with all its difficulties, seemed richer when experienced together. One evening, they found themselves sitting on a bench near a quiet river. The water reflected the soft colors of the evening sky. They didn't speak at first. The silence was comfortable, filled with the unspoken understanding of months spent learning, struggling, forgiving, and growing together. Finally, he reached out and took her hand, gently, without hesitation. She rested her hand in his. Feeling the warmth and steadiness she had come to trust so deeply. "I'm glad we found each other," he said softly. His voice carried no demands, no pressure, only honesty. She smiled, feeling the truth in his words. "Me too," she replied. "I didn't think it was possible, but I feel safe with you. I feel seen." They didn't need more than that. Words were not always necessary. Their presence, the touch of hands, the quiet understanding spoke volumes that no sentence could capture. In that moment, they knew their bond had reached a depth neither of them had anticipated. Built, not on perfection, but on patience, care, and mutual respect, life continued, as it always does. With responsibilities and challenges. Work demanded attention, family needed care, and small frustrations arose. But they approached each challenge differently now. They communicated openly, listened deeply, and supported each other without judgment. When one felt tired, the other offered gentle encouragement. When one felt doubt, the other offered reassurance. They learned that love was not about avoiding difficulties, but about navigating them together. They laughed often, sometimes over nothing at all. Their laughter was not dramatic or forced. It was natural, arising from shared moments of understanding and delight. Sometimes they laughed at mistakes, at the absurdities of life, at themselves. These moments reminded them that love was not always serious. It could be light, playful, and comforting, even in the midst of ordinary days. They also shared quiet nights of conversation, where dreams, fears, and hopes were exchanged without pressure or expectation. He spoke of the future he wanted, not in terms of wealth or fame, but in terms of moments of connection, joy, and honesty. She spoke of her dreams, small and big, and he listened without judgment. They began to see that love was about creating a life together that honored both hearts. Not about one person changing for the other. Challenges still arose, as life rarely allows a smooth path. There were days when he felt anxious about responsibilities, days when she worried about disappointments or misunderstandings. But each challenge was met together. They no longer feared conflict because they had learned to approach it with patience, honesty, and care. They knew that disagreements were not threats, but opportunities to understand each other more deeply. One afternoon, during a quiet walk, he stopped and turned to her. "I want you to know," he said, "that no matter what happens, I will choose you. Not because life is easy, but because I've seen what we can be together. I've seen how real this is." She looked at him, feeling a warmth in her chest she hadn't felt in years. "I choose you too," she said. "Not because everything will be perfect, but because I know we can face anything together. I know this love is real." In that moment, the ordinary world around them seemed to fade slightly. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic declarations. Only two hearts, quietly affirming the truth of what had grown between them. They understood that real love was not about perfection, but about choosing each other every day. Through simple actions, through patience, through understanding, they began to imagine a life together in small, practical ways. Planning weekends, sharing meals, supporting each other's work and personal goals. They didn't rush into anything grand or life-changing all at once. Instead, they built slowly, with intention, ensuring that each step was based on mutual respect and shared understanding. Even the ordinary moments became significant. Cooking together, sharing stories from the day, sitting in silence while reading side by side, or walking hand in hand in a quiet park, all of these moments carried meaning because they were shared, noticed, and appreciated. They learned that love was not always about excitement or drama. It was about consistency, care, the presence of someone who truly sees you. They also continued to support each other emotionally. When he felt anxious or tired, she offered patience, understanding, and quiet encouragement. When she felt insecure or overwhelmed, he provided reassurance, calm, and space to breathe. In doing so, they discovered that love was as much about giving as it was about receiving, and that true connection grew through acts of care, attention, and mutual support. One quiet evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with gentle hues, they sat on a bench near the water. The world was calm, and the air carried a soft stillness. He held her hand, and she leaned gently against him. Neither spoke for a long while. Words were not needed. The silence was full of understanding, trust, and the quiet joy of being together. They knew that life would continue to bring challenges, disappointments, and moments of fear. But they also knew that they had built something that could withstand these trials. Their love had been tested, broken in small ways, and then rebuilt with patience and care. It was resilient, deep, and profoundly human. In time, they no longer feared vulnerability. They no longer feared sharing doubts or expressing needs. They had learned that honesty was not a threat to connection, but the foundation of it. They had discovered that love required effort, communication, and the willingness to face life together. Not just when it was easy, but especially when it was hard. Their bond became a quiet inspiration. Not for anyone else to see, but for themselves to feel. Every small act of care, every gesture of understanding, every moment of patience reinforced the strength of what they had. They realized that love was not about grand moments, but about consistency, presence, and the quiet choice to stay again and again. Through life's ups and downs, they began to feel a sense of peace they hadn't known in years. Life was not perfect, but it was full. Full of connection, understanding, laughter, and quiet moments of joy. They understood that love was not about avoiding pain, but about finding someone with whom even the difficult moments could be faced together. They talked about dreams, not as fantasies, but as possibilities. Travel, small adventures, learning, and growing together. They imagined a life that was ordinary in many ways, but extraordinary because they would share it fully and honestly. They didn't need perfection. They needed truth, care, and mutual respect, and they had all three, as months turned into years. Their connection deepened further. Life brought its usual mix of challenges and small victories. Work pressures, family matters, unexpected problems, but through it all, they remained partners, friends, and companions. Their love had been tempered by difficulty, tested by reality, and strengthened through effort. It was no longer fragile. It was enduring. One quiet night, sitting side by side under the soft glow of a lamp, he looked at her and smiled. "I can't imagine life without you," he said. She smiled back, feeling warmth spread through her chest. "And I can't imagine life without you," she replied. "Not because life is easy, but because you make it worth facing everything together." And in that quiet affirmation, they understood the truth they had been discovering all along. Love is not about perfection, not about grand gestures, not about constant excitement. Love is about showing up, caring deeply, forgiving, communicating, supporting, and choosing each other every day. Their story did not end with fireworks or dramatic finales. It ended in quiet reality, the kind of love that feels real because it is human. They walked through life together not because it was always simple, but because it was always worth it. Every day, every smile, every shared silence became a part of the love they had carefully, patiently, and courageously built. In the end, their love was powerful not because it was perfect, but because it was real, enduring, and human in every way. It was the kind of love that survives storms, grows through patience, heals through forgiveness, and shines quietly in the ordinary moments of life. And in that, they found something rare, something beautiful, something unforgettable. Time moved forward, but their connection continued to grow in ways neither had anticipated. Life, as it always did, brought a mixture of ordinary days and unexpected challenges. Yet they found themselves facing each moment together, side by side. There was a calmness now that had not been there in the early days of their relationship. It was not a loud happiness, but a quiet certainty, a feeling that whatever came, they could handle it together. He noticed how small things began to matter even more. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear absent-mindedly. The way she laughed at tiny, silly things that others might not notice. The way she paused in her own thoughts and allowed him to notice, to be present without forcing interaction. Each of these moments became small treasures. Reminders that connection was found in noticing, appreciating, and valuing the other person fully. She noticed him too. She noticed the way he sometimes stared out a window when lost in thought. The way his hand brushed against hers in passing. The quiet patience he had cultivated over time. She saw how he no longer avoided expressing himself, how he spoke of his thoughts and fears with honesty rather than retreating. In that honesty, She felt a deep sense of trust and comfort, the kind that only comes after months of shared experience, struggle, and growth. They had learned the rhythm of each other's lives. Morning routines, quiet breakfasts, the moments of pause in the middle of a busy day all became moments of shared awareness. They didn't need constant conversation to feel connected. Silence became a companion rather than a threat. Filled with mutual understanding, calmness, and the deep recognition of each other's presence. Even the challenges of life seemed smaller when they faced them together. Work stress, family obligations, unexpected problems, these things no longer felt isolating. When one felt pressure, the other offered quiet support. When one felt doubt, the other offered reassurance. It was no longer a question of whether life would test them. It was a question of how they would respond, together, patiently and carefully, as partners in a shared life. One afternoon, they found themselves walking through a quiet park. The trees had begun to show the first hints of spring, with green buds peeking through the still bare branches. The sun was warm but not harsh, and the air carried a gentle breeze. They walked slowly, enjoying the quiet beauty around them, hand in hand, but without feeling the need to speak constantly. Their presence was enough. He broke the silence eventually, in a soft voice that matched the calm of the day. "I've been thinking about how much has changed," he said. "Not just between us, but in me. I feel different. Lighter, calmer, like I've learned how to live again in ways I couldn't before." She smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. "I feel the same," she said. "Being with you. It's not about always feeling happy. It's about feeling safe, seen, and understood. It's about knowing that even if life is hard, I'm not alone." They walked in quiet companionship for a while longer, savoring the simplicity of the moment. It was ordinary, yet it felt extraordinary because of the depth of their connection. They had discovered that real love did not need to be loud or dramatic. It was steady, patient, and nurturing. And it grew stronger with every small act of care, every shared glance, every quiet gesture as weeks turned into months. They continued to build their shared life in small, intentional ways. They planned quiet weekends, sometimes cooking meals together, sometimes walking in the park, sometimes sitting side by side with no agenda but to be present. They supported each other's work, encouraged personal growth, and celebrated each small accomplishment, no matter how minor it might seem to the outside world. He began to notice how much he had grown as a person because of her. Patience, understanding, the willingness to communicate honestly, the ability to face difficult emotions rather than running from them, of these had deepened in ways he never expected. She had taught him without trying. That real connection was about showing up consistently, not about grand gestures or words of promise. She noticed growth in herself, too. Vulnerability no longer felt dangerous. Expressing needs and fears no longer felt like a burden. She realized that love was not about losing herself or being weak. It was about being fully human and allowing someone to meet her there with care and attention. In him, she had found not only a partner, but also a reflection of her own capacity to love, trust, and hope. One quiet evening, they sat together on a small balcony, looking out over the city lights as darkness settled. The sky was deep blue, and stars had begun to appear. They held hands, not for show or necessity, but because it felt natural, quiet affirmation of presence and connection. "I think about the future sometimes," he said. "Not in terms of plans or expectations, but just imagining it with you. Even when life is uncertain, I feel like I want to face it with you." She nodded, squeezing his hand gently. "I feel the same way. It doesn't have to be perfect, as long as we're together. That's what matters. That's what makes it feel right." Their love had matured into something both gentle and strong. They no longer needed constant reassurance, because their actions, small and consistent, spoke louder than words ever could. Every shared meal, every quiet walk, every moment of listening and understanding reinforced the foundation they had built over time. They faced difficult moments as they had before, but now with more grace. Misunderstandings arose occasionally, as they always would, but neither responded with fear or avoidance. They spoke openly, listened carefully, and chose understanding over pride. They had learned that the strength of a relationship was not measured by the absence of difficulty, but by the way challenges were met together. Sometimes they reminisced about the early days, about the moments when uncertainty and doubt had threatened to pull them apart. They laughed softly at the memory of their first awkward conversations, the small misunderstandings, and the times when fear had made them hesitant to fully trust. Looking back, they realized that each challenge had been a step toward a deeper connection, each obstacle a test that had strengthened their bond. He often found himself marveling at the depth of her presence. She had become a constant source of calm, comfort, and encouragement. Her laughter was a reminder to not take life too seriously. Her patience was a model of care and understanding. Her honesty allowed him to be fully himself, without fear of judgment. She had become not only his partner but his anchor in a world that often felt uncertain. She, though, found herself amazed by the steadiness he had cultivated. His presence no longer carried the tension and distance of the early days. His words, actions, and gestures conveyed care, patience, and a commitment to connection that went beyond any promises. She felt secure, seen, and valued in a way that filled her heart with quiet joy. They began to talk more about dreams, not as plans to control the future, but as visions to inspire and guide them together. Travel to small, quiet places. Learning new skills, creating routines that nurtured both their spirits. They discovered that shared goals, even small ones, deepened their connection and created meaning beyond the day-to-day routines. Every evening became an opportunity to nurture their bond. A shared cup of tea, a gentle conversation, a quiet moment watching the sunset. These ordinary moments became extraordinary because they were shared, noticed, and valued. They learned that the rhythm of daily life could be filled with intimacy, care, and love if approached with intention and attention. They also continued to grow individually. He pursued interests and projects that mattered to him, supported by her encouragement. She explored her own passions, knowing he would celebrate her efforts without judgment. They realized that love did not mean losing independence, but rather supporting each other's growth while staying connected at the heart. On a cool evening, they walked through a quiet street, the city lights casting gentle reflections on wet pavement after a light rain. He stopped and looked at her, his eyes reflecting the warmth and depth of feeling he had carried for months, now years. "I feel like everything in my life led me to this point," he said. "To you, to us. I can't imagine facing life without you by my side." She smiled softly, her hand brushing his arm. "I feel the same. And I don't just want to be with you when things are easy. I want to be with you when life is messy, when it's complicated, when it's ordinary. That's what makes it real." In that moment, they understood a profound truth. Love was not about perfection or constant joy. It was about showing up, listening, supporting, forgiving, and choosing each other every single day. It was about creating a life together that was human, authentic, and deeply connected. They embraced the ordinary, the simple, the quiet, because it had become the vessel for their extraordinary bond. Every shared silence, every small act of kindness, every gesture of understanding carried the weight and beauty of their love. They had discovered that love's true power lay in these consistent, human moments repeated day after day, not in grand declarations or dramatic events. As months continued, they continued to face life together, hand in hand, side by side. Challenges arose, as they always would, but the foundation they had built allowed them to navigate them with patience, honesty, and resilience. Their love had matured, deepened, and strengthened. It was no longer fragile, uncertain, or tentative. It was steady, enduring, and profoundly real. In quiet moments, they would reflect on how far they had come. They had faced doubt, fear, and conflict. They had learned patience, forgiveness, and understanding. They had discovered the beauty of ordinary life shared fully and honestly. And through it all, they had chosen each other again and again. With intention and care, they no longer feared vulnerability. They no longer doubted their connection. They had learned that love, True love was not about avoiding pain or difficulty, but about facing it together, nurturing it with honesty, and choosing each other every day. And in that, they found a love that felt real, enduring, and human in every sense. A love that survived storms, healed after breaking, and grew stronger over time. A love that was quiet, patient, and full of meaning in the ordinary moments of life. A love that was theirs, fully and beautifully, without pretension, without drama, simply human and profoundly alive.